Hello everybody, Andrew Casey from Hypersanity Books. Today's video will be a little bit different as a case study. We're taking a look at the Canadian Medical Association Journal and some of the different responses through what their opinion is on mental health issues in Winnie-the-Pooh. There is also the other point I want to bring up. There are other publications about the subject matter claiming that Christopher Robin has schizophrenia. Or is it child imagination? There are other things to touch on within this video. There will be some other referencing from the movie Goodbye Christopher Robin. Otherwise, let's get into it. Number 10. 4 categories. There are 4 categories to consider. So the first is clinical disorders. The second is personality disorders. Number 3, general medical conditions. The fourth is psychosocial environmental issues. There should be a 5th category, and the 5th category is treatment. One thing that gets missed when it comes to mental health and different subject matters is treatment. And that's something that I've talked to with psychologists in doing some of the videos that I do, and different subject matters on a lot of my writing, is treatment. Are characters treatable? Number 9, Winnie-the-Pooh. So in the Winnie-the-Pooh franchise, he's seen as the main character, as well as Christopher Robin. It's more like a little brother. That was the intention of the character. Winnie-the-Pooh was also the child's teddy, the teddy in the book, and named after an actual bear at the local zoo. With Winnie-the-Pooh, however, he is diagnosed with a subtype of ADHD and very mild OCD. There is also some other factors of mental retardation.
You are retarded?
Yes. And
physical or mental?
I'm not trying to be offensive with that word, because he has a small brain, according to this journal. Number 8. Piglet and Eeyore. They're both similar with some categories, that's why I've put them together. So Piglet has diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, and Eeyore is diagnosed with dyslexic disorder. General medical conditions: Piglet fails to thrive, and Eeyore has his tail amputated, because that's traumatic for the poor Eeyore.
Not much of a house, just right for not much of a donkey.
Housing. Eeyore comes under having housing problems, so the environment is bad for him. Even though the environmental factors all include all characters, this is how they've diagnosed him. Number 7, Rabbit. So Rabbit is diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. Now, I'd like to argue in his defense. Other publications have said he has OCD, which is absolutely correct. There are other publications that talk about 7 deadly sins in the characterization of Winnie-the-Pooh to what inspires writing the characters, and that's something to think about. Sometimes a simple concept such as 7 deadly sins can help you create 7 different characters. That pride is not necessarily such a deadly sin or obsessive. He's actually growing the food that he enjoys, which is quite normal. It's everyone else's behavior that's disrupting his environment. Number 6, Owl and Tigger.
Gone out, busy Baxon, signed Christopher Robin. Our dear friend Christopher Robin has been captured. What? By a creature called the Baxon.
So Owl is dyslexic. See, this is the thing. Dyslexic is a hard word to say, and it's also a hard word to spell. Tigger has ADHD, very extreme hyperactive personality disorder within him as well. Within the diagnosis, it only talks about Owl having an housing issue. Now, with Owl having his house in a tree, it actually does make sense. I also believe the character was created by A.A. Milne as a way of creating a character to be flawed, to play on words, which is what some authors do. Number 5, Kenga and Roo. This comes into some offensive category in some of the different articles. Some come to some unusual conclusions that have nothing to do with the source material. I mean, if some of it gets into drug use. But we're not going to go down that rabbit hole today. With Kenga and Roo, it's being a single parent, unemployed, overprotective of child. For Roo, single parenthood, undesirable peer group, victim of unusual feeding practices. So, when I was playing the second chapter to the Dark Sparrow book, there touches on a list of subjects that are difficult to talk about. And at the top, I argue it's custody and parenting. Because you talk about those subjects in a workplace, you're going to get into some arguments. Talk about. So my son was listening to the Dark Sparrow audiobook, and within the second chapter, it talked about a list, and one of the subject matters was extended breastfeeding. So at the end I said, was there any of those within the list that was a shock to you? And he said, yeah, extended breastfeeding. Why would you even talk about breastfeeding on a first date? To get to know someone?
Are you absolutely sure you don't mind us staying for the whole week?
Oh, don't be silly. It'll be a pleasure having you here.
Bitty.
Maybe later.
Want Bitty now?
Come on, Harvey, you've had quite enough Bitty for one day.
And I explained to him, do you understand what the subject is? And he says, yeah, feeding a baby. I said, well, I've got a different subject matter to explain to you. And this is why it's important to talk about difficult subjects before you're involved in a relationship. This is the best advice. You need to know who you're getting involved with. So, onto the subject matter of Kanga and Roo, it has its environmental impact, which is where the focus is. But it's not necessarily accurate. It's just jumping to some conclusions. And outside of this source material, some conclusions get pretty dark.
You know, sometimes when guys go on the first date, you know, they say, okay, I bought you this stuff, now you owe me. You know, instead of, why don't you just sit down at the park bench and just talk?
The other thing is, people say don't talk about religion and politics when you're in public places or on dates. But this says to talk about politics, it says talk about Trump when you talk politics on a date.
No, you just talk about everything. Get everything out the way. You don't want to find out and say, wow, honey, I didn't know that about you. You know this because you don't talk about those things.
Right.
So you need to talk.
Number 4, diagnosing Christopher Robin. So within this, I don't 100% agree with the article. I mostly agree with a lot of points. Their article has nothing to do with schizophrenia or child imagination, which is quite important, the child imagination part, but I'll get to that. The point that they're focused on is gender identity disorder through his childhood, and that's important, but we'll move on to that. The other part is, to the source material, is lack of parenting and possible lack of education. Number 3, not my mum.
You do know it was me talking, not the bear. I was just playing, you see.
Yes, I was just joining in.
I said this in the other Christopher Robin video. Yes, not my mum, and I'm glad I don't have a mother like this. She wanted a girl, bought a whole stack of girl clothes, as some people do when they're expecting, and she gets disappointed when she has a boy. So, dressing your boy up as a girl. There are some people who will argue on pronouns.
You know, he could just get over learning to program a few pronouns into his phone. By the way, I only have half a dozen or so that I actually use on an everyday basis, so it's not all that difficult.
And I will also argue against neo-pronouns.
Today I'm going to show you how to use eggs pronouns. Today I'm going to show you how to use sunshine pronouns. Today I'm going to show you how to use gummies pronouns.
It's like she's fucking 5.
Things pronouns. Cookies pronouns. Bugs pronouns. Witches pronouns. Giraffes pronouns. Frogs pronouns. Roars pronouns. Mermaids pronouns.
We do not need to make up words. The English language has different challenges. We do not need to complicate it. With whatever the case is, this was not a good situation for the child. The mother's narcissistic personality does not help this child. She also pushes herself. So in a time of leaving the father, the nanny also had to leave for her sick mum, which is in the premise of the Goodbye Christopher Robin story. So the mothers, there was a poem written by the father called Vespers, because there was a part of him wanting his wife back.
Supportive, loving presence in his life through it all.
Then there is the nanny. The nanny mostly raised Christopher Robin. She was in the poem Buckingham Palace under the name Alice, because it rhymed with palace. With the character, or this nanny in real life, she looked after him. She was mostly raising him in his earliest stages of childhood, despite different conflicts of parenting. Parenting can get pretty nasty. As a nanny, she also had her sick mum. She also wanted a relationship, so she was going to have less time to look after things because she was focused on her happiness, as the mother also argued against the nanny having her own happiness, being preoccupied. And sometimes that's one fact of life. You can't make everyone happy, and some workplaces and some people you work for are toxic. The mother is a very toxic person. The nanny was quite nice, though she also had 2 different names, and that's where the story can get more complicated moving forward.
Been in a much worse place. So she was paid to fulfill this position in his life, and luckily it was in his heart.
Number 2, Christopher Robin, multiple names.
Well, there was a swan, and I wanted to call it. And blue, I mean Emil, I mean Daddy. If you call it Pooh and it doesn't come, you can just pretend you were saying Pooh. My bear has a different name in real life, and I've got a different name in real life. And there's no good asking because we shan't tell. They're our names and we're keeping them.
He wanted to be himself and be called Christopher Robin, but then his name Christopher Robin was still put in the books, and then there was pressure from what other people expect of you. There was pressure from the media, there was pressure from interviews, and there was just too much for a child who was 6 years old. He was turning 7, turning 8, too much pressure. With this poor child, however, I found that there are some things where he was enjoying it, and there are other parts where you weren't having your personal life with people out in public to harass you, to have that quality time with your father. So in living in an environment of 100-acre wood, yes, I couldn't blame the kid for wanting to separate from society more. As he grew up, there were other challenges that he faced when he was getting into private education.
Will you say your prayers?
Leave me alone.
Shut up.
Nobody cares. Nobody cares. Christopher Robin got shoved down the stairs.
Nobody cares. Christopher Robin got shoved down the stairs. Nobody cares. Christopher Robin got shoved down the stairs.
As soon as I understood, I stopped writing it. What else could I do?
Nothing. We played in the woods, and then you wrote that book, and it all stopped. As if it had all been a piece of research.
So it was considered that there were different consequences for the book Winnie-the-Pooh being written. Now, there are not necessarily bad intentions with things, and with most childhoods, a lot of people will complain about a multitude of different things. So sometimes you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. However, when you look within the story, within the end, he appreciated having a childhood.
You reminded people what happiness was, what childhood could be, when everything else was broken.
But your own childhood
It was wonderful.
Who would have guessed that bear would swallow us up?
This was all ours, wasn't it? Before it was anyone else's.
Yes.
Where does this leave everything, though? The child did not have schizophrenia. He did not have schizophrenia growing up. And within Winnie-the-Pooh franchise, it is a child playing with his toys. Imagination. Number 1. Father and son, treatable.
Once upon a time, there was a great war that brought so much sadness to so many people.
Are we writing a book? I thought we were just having fun.
We're writing a book and we're having fun.
Within the conclusion to what I would say, with different challenges that they both had within life, the father absolutely diagnosed with PTSD, and a severe case of that. General medical conditions, yes. One thing is, when he was writing the book against war, he was writing and going back into the trauma, and that was hard. When you're trying to change the world, change a million lives, he also thought World War I would be the war to end all wars. So World War II and what was happening for Christopher Robin to be deployed, that was not something he was expecting to happen. He was hoping to use the talents that he had. So going back into the trauma, which is the point on the general condition, yes, that's a hard thing to do. Sometimes it's also effective for your writing to go through certain events that are hard. And sometimes with your writing, that is an effective way to go. The social and the environmental impact, I would say the big social problem with the father was what everyone else expected of him when he returned from World War I. And seeing that a lot of people in society were fake. So he wanted to remove from theatre, keep writing books and then taking a different path. The environmental change, going to the 100-acre forest, wonderful thing to do. So removing yourself from toxic people is a fantastic thing to do. So the father's trying to do what he can. Is he trying to get treatment? To some extent, yes. He's just trying to do it a different way. Maybe not by the textbook to certain mental health organisations or recommendations, but sometimes you're finding a different path in life. Now with Christopher Robin, within some of those different challenges, one thing to make perfectly clear between the writing of Winnie-the-Pooh, between the father and the son, they both had their ups and downs, they had their challenges, but there were ways of healing within life. And there were ways of being grateful for having a childhood. So in conclusion, it's child imagination, not schizophrenia. Leave poor Christopher Robin alone. And that's it for today. Hit like, subscribe, comment, and we'll be doing more case study videos soon.